Hey everyone, it's Justine, and today I am going to show you how to use texture paste in 3 different ways, making 3 different cards. I made these cards for the Simon Says Stamp blog post on texture paste. We're going to start off with an 11 by 4 1/4 piece of 110 pound Neenah Solar White cardstock, and that's going to be our card base. Next up, I'm going to lay the tiny spaced hearts stencil from Simon Says Stamp over my card, and I'm going to secure that with some washi tape. Once that is secured, I'm going to add some Dreamweaver white texture paste, and I'm going to spread that over using my palette knife. And at first I put a lot on. I'm going to scrape it off and put it back in the jar, so don't worry about wasting anything. And then I just go over and smooth over the stencil so that I get a nice even impression. Now here comes the fun part with stenciling and texture paste, is the reveal of what happens when you take off the stencil. We get a really awesome heart impression over the background. Now I'm going to do some stamping using the Ulta New Vintage Flowers stamp set. I'm going to be stamping on 80 pound Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I'm going to be stamping these flowers, and they're a 3-layer stamp. So it starts with the base, so I'm starting with the pink. I'm doing Angel Pink, and then I'm going to be going into a second layer of Angel Pink using the second layer. So because the ink is doubly inked on there in the same color, the second coat does end up being a tad darker. And then I'm going to go into a darker pink, which is the rosebud color, for the third and final step. These create really great texture look. It creates a depth to the stamp, and it makes the stamps look really lifelike. You kind of have to play around with it a little bit so that you get it stamped in the right spot. I'm going to be repeating this process until I get 5 flowers in total that all look similar in that 3-step stamping. For the purple, I'm using Lulu Lavender and Sweet Plum as my colors, and then I am going to be also doing a second stamp in that purple as well, and then a third one in a smaller of one of the flowers. As you can see, these flowers really come to life with stamping. For the leaves, I used New Sprout and Bamboo Leaves. Now that my stamping is all finished, I'm going to fussy cut all of these flowers, and then I'm going to attach them to my card. I didn't end up getting the dies for these flowers, so I ended up having to cut them with my scissors, and I used microtip scissors because they really get into small areas and stamp really accurately. Now comes the time where I arrange my little collage of flowers on my card. I have 3 purple and 2 pink flowers, and then the leaves to separate them. So I wasn't too concerned about having flowers that were touching each other that were the same color. So I added some using the pop dots and some glued directly onto the texture pasted background because I wanted to create a variety of layers and looks. I ended up separating the 2 purples by adding some leaves, as well as the 2 pinks. One of the leaves I put on pop dot, and one of them I glued directly to the paper, again just to create that depth look. So it creates a really quite a large collage without there actually being a lot of depth to the card. Next, I'm using the You're Amazing die cut from Simon Says Stamp, and I sent that through my die cutting machine using a piece of black cardstock that I had on hand. These are really delicate dies, and I really think that the title fit well with the handwriting as well as the delicateness and thinness of the title, that it worked really well with this particular stamp and collage. After poking out all the little pieces there that I needed to, I used some Tombow Mono liquid adhesive, and I glued the title onto my card. I started out with the Amazing and laid it over, making sure that it went over mostly the pink part so that it didn't get lost in the actual collage. Same here, I had to readjust the Your because I thought you couldn't see it very well on the purple flower. So I moved that over onto the pink one. Lastly, I just wanted to add some sequins onto my card, so I added some glue onto my scrap piece of paper, dunked the sequins in, and then added to my card to make sure there wasn't excess glue that was going to pop out. Now that's the end of this card here, and let's move on to the next one where we're going to learn about translucent texture paste. Now translucent texture paste is a lot of fun, and I like to use it on colored backgrounds. Starting off with a Distress Broken China ink, I'm going to be inking up a piece of 4 by 5 1/4 piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock. I'm using Broken China, Picked Raspberry for the pink, Dusty Concord for the purple, Spice Marmalade for the orange, and Mustard Seed for the yellow. As you can see, I accidentally blended one area that ended up being really dark with the yellow when I added the yellow and the purple together, it ended up creating sort of a black spot. That meant that I ended up changing the direction of my card so I could cover that up. Using the bubble stencil from Tim Holtz, I laid it over my card and added some translucent texture paste, the same technique as we did in card 1. I made sure that it was all evenly spread over the card. Next up came the fun reveal of removing my stencil. As you can see, it looks white, but as it dries, it will turn clear. You just have to set it off to the side, and it takes about 20 minutes to dry. In the meantime, I created my card base. I was planning on making this a top folding card, so I had done so the same as the first card, 11 by 4 1/4, scored at 5 1/2 to make a top folding card. I probably would have done it the other way if I would have known I was covering up the mistake, and that would have been an 8 1/2 by 5 1/2 card scored at 4 1/4, and that way you would have gotten a top folding horizontal card instead. But I didn't realize how much that little dark spot at the top there bothered me at the time, and so I ended up switching around the card, but overall it still opens, and I'm happy with the way that it turned out. I added my background. You can see the texture paste is all dry now, and I added that to my card. Next up, I grabbed my stitched rectangle die, one of the medium dies here, and I sent that through my die cutting machine, and I'm cutting a piece of 80-pound Nina Solar white cardstock for my title and sentiment that I'm going to be using on the card. I really like the stitched sentiment because it adds just a little something by adding that stitched border. I decided to make this fun and colorful card a birthday card since it's fairly gender neutral. I used the Happy Birthday to You stamp from Avery L's Numbered Balloons, and I stamped that using Onyx VersaFine ink. It's my favorite ink to use for sentiments, personally, because I think it gives a really crisp impression, and I stamped that onto my stitched rectangle piece that I had die cut previously. I put even pressure and stamped that down. Next, I needed to attach this to my card. I added some 3D foam tape from Simon Says Stamps Big Mama Roll, and I attached that to my card. Originally, I attached it on the side here, but it did end up bothering me slightly, and I wanted to change that. But before I did, I added some liquid pearls in white to my card to add a little bit of an accent to the card itself. All you do to do this is squeeze a small amount, and then they dry as hard pearls on your card. This is the part where I had to do a little card surgery. I removed my sentiment and then I attached it to make it a horizontal card just like this one here. I decided to cover up that dark spot that I was really not liking. When I was doing my card surgery, you can see in the top corner there was a little piece that ended up sticking and ripping the card. So I added some holiday shapes to my card in these little stars. It was a die cut from Simon Says Stamp and that I cut out in white, and I covered up my mistake using those little stars. So that was the final reveal of the translucent texture paste that adds such a subtle detail. Next, I'm going to show you how to color texture paste. For me personally, when purchasing texture paste, you really only need white and translucent to get really great effects. You can also add gold and silver to your collection, and that's pretty much all you need because the rest of the colors you can actually make quite easily using some inks and mixing them with either a white or translucent texture paste. So I'm going to start off with my card base, which measures 11 by 4 1/4, just like all three of the cards that we created today to make a top folding card. This is a 110-pound Nina Solar white cardstock. Next up, I grabbed a piece of 4 by 5 1/4 80-pound Nina Solar white cardstock, and I wanted to attach some masking tape from Post-it that I collected, and I ended up having a little hard time getting it straight onto the paper, so I decided to use my grid lines here to help me. So I steadied my card on the grid lines and then was able to align my masking tape so that it was perfectly straight. So I wanted to create and mask off a panel here where I was going to do just a small bit of stenciling and combine that with the masking technique. Using the Raindrops stencil from Simon Says Stamp, I attached that using some washi tape to keep the stencil in place. I added a piece of washi tape to the top and to the bottom so that it held both the cardstock and the stencil in place, as well as the masking tape. I took my craft mat and placed it off to the side here, and I added some broken china ink. I used my mini mister and combined with a little Perfect Pearls white and to make a shimmer in the texture paste, and then I just added some white texture paste to the mixture, and then I just mixed with my palette knife until the blue was created that I wanted. If it's too dark, add some more texture paste, and if it's too light, then just add some more color. I ended up going over my small area of the mass stencil and then I continued with my palette knife to get an even coat. To clean your stencils and to clean off texture paste, do it immediately so that it's easier, and all I do is use a baby wipe or you can run it under some water. They clean off really well as long as you don't let it dry. Now comes the big reveal, and you can see my masked off area. This is a really excellent way to add some texture paste without it being over the entire background. Using masking tape really helps. Now using Simon Says Stamp Wishing die cut, I sent that through my die cutting machine on Neenah Solar White cardstock. I always use Neenah Solar White in either 80 or 110 pound because the shades of white always match each other, and it's a really great way to prevent adding too thick of paper or too thin of paper. Because the wishing was done in white and it was going to end up being a white on white, I ended up stamping this stamp here from the Sending and Wishing stamp from Simon Says Stamp. And since it was a raindrop, I wanted to be sort of a sad themed card and an I miss you card. So I stamped that using Versamark ink onto a piece of black cardstock, and using Ranger super fine embossing powder, I ended up heat embossing this Wishing We Lived Closer Because I Miss You stamp. I just added my heat tool to the paper and then I embossed that so that it melted, and then I was able to cut it out. After that was finished melting, I took my paper cutter and then I just trimmed off the piece of the We Lived Closer, and I added a fishtail to the back. Now I wanted to add some 3D foam tape so that this stuck out. Again, I was a little worried about the sentiment getting lost with just the wishing in white, and so I wanted to make sure that there was a really bold piece of black on the card itself. And I think that ended up being a really effective way of looking at the card. So all I needed to do was attach these, the wishing part, and I used that using some Tombow Mono liquid adhesive. So now I just needed to attach my card panel that I created to the card base we created in the beginning to make a really nice white on white look, and I had attached that using some 3D foam tape from the Big Mama roll from Simon Says Stamp. I hope you enjoyed this card tutorial on texture paste, and I hope I taught you maybe a little something about using them. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe and leave a comment below.